Well, hello, and welcome back to another video. I am very excited to be making this one today. I'm going to be talking about Myers-Briggs personality type, cognitive functions, and everything in between. I'll also talk about mine, and yeah, this is something that I have known about since either junior year or senior year of high school, and I got really into it senior year of high school and freshman year of college, and then a little bit sophomore year as well, and then it started to kind of fade away like junior and senior year, and now I've been out of school for 2 years, so it's been a couple years since I have delved into Myers-Briggs personality, and I'm very excited to be talking about it today because I've kind of reintroduced myself. There were points when I wasn't like as into it that I would still like, kind of like explore from time to time or just kind of like dip my feet in. But recently, the past month, I would say, maybe not even that, I have really started to dig it back up again and go back to my old favorite channels and find new channels, and that has been really exciting and fun for me. So let's just start off with the beginning, and then we'll get a little bit deeper with like cognitive functions, and then we'll get into like myself and my own reflection in my life. So first off, personality test. What is it? Let's just, get everything out of the way. First off, people may object to putting people in a box, and it's being limiting or being very arbitrary and not something that you should actually take any, credence in or put a lot of, stock into it or any like foundation. And I hear all of that. I totally do. But I don't think it's right to necessarily discount it completely and say, I'm getting rid of this, I'm throwing it in the trash and not even looking at it. I don't think that's good because there is a lot that can be gleaned from these personality tests. I mean, for example, without giving my type away yet, because I want to save that for the end of the video and give you a chance to guess. So kind of watch the video if you do know about Myers-Briggs. Kind of watch the video and then comment down below what you thought it was and obviously what it ended up being when I reveal it. But people don't like being put into, well, what was I going to say? Being put into a box, I think. Oh, no, this is what I was going to say. I was going to say that we can glean a lot from it. And when I first did it, I was like, oh my goodness, this is such great tools and knowledge. I feel really understood. I always felt very misunderstood or just very special and very unique, and reading the Myers-Briggs, I was like, this is me, like I can't believe it, like there's something that I can put a name to it, why I'm so different. And then I'll talk about this more, like especially with the people I was surrounded with and how I related to them. So it's most known as 16 personalities. And I really hate this because it just goes off of the letters, so like Infj or ESTJ, things like that. And so people have a misunderstanding because it's so basic. They're thinking, because when you take the test online, like 16 personalities, it does percentages. So you could be like, oh, I'm like 60% extroverted and 40% introverted. Or I used to be that, but now I'm like 50-50. I really hate that test. I mean, it could be nice, and it's like a nice little like surface level introduction, but I really feel like it should just be like thrown in the trash because it just breeds a lot of misinformation to where people think like, oh, I was an INFJ, but now I'm an ENTJ, and things like that. Or like I was an ESFJ, but now I'm an ISFJ, or vice versa. They think that they like grew an extroversion, or they grew in like judging versus perceiving, like they got more organized, or they got more like thinking versus feeling. I feel like most people, it's the last two that they kind of interchange a lot more. People who are like who are like sensors or who are intuitive people, they don't really ever flip-flop. Like if they either think, oh, I'm an ISFJ, or I'm an ENFJ, or I mean INFJ, they don't do that as much. And the T and F can be kind of put into question, like, am I an ENFP or an ENTP? But even that's not so much. And then the third one that gets mistyped if people think they can flip-flop is like Infp versus Infj. But hands down, the one that most people think that they can flip-flop from is like the E and the I one, because as we grow, we should become more balanced. So let's say you are an ISFJ and then you go to college and you get plugged into like a church community or your basketball team or whatever organization it is, and then you're like growing in extroversion because of that. You're finding your people and then you want to be around them more and you're doing more activities. You're also adults, so you have more freedom to like go explore and be extroverted. So then people are like, oh, like I was an introvert but now I'm an extrovert. No, that's not how it works. You can't change personality types. And there's a lot of differences that people are not giving credit towards, and that's where cognitive functions come in. Because, for example, there is, let's use one that gets commonly mistyped, which is, let's see which one I want to do. We'll do like INFJ versus INTJ, okay? We'll do those. And so people think like, oh, I just grew, but they have very different cognitive functions. And so that's what is interesting when you get deeper into this and you learn about cognitive functions. You realize you can't just switch between the two of them because the cognitive functions are like completely different. Like some of them may have overlap, but usually there's a lot of differences, and the stack is also very different. So it makes more sense to me that some people would get mistyped if they have one and another one that have the same cognitive functions just in different orders. That makes a little bit more sense to me than one and another one that on the surface level it looks like they have a lot of similarities, like INTJ, INFJ. It's like, oh, we're only missing one letter, but the cognitive functions are really different. So that's why I think cognitive functions brings a lot more credibility to the whole 16 personalities, Myers-Briggs, that people don't know about. And once you get into that, it becomes a lot more fun, in my opinion, because it's a lot nerdier and there's a lot more like science, psychology stuff behind it, to where, yeah, like the Myers-Briggs is very like surface level and not very deep, and so I can see why people write it off, because like I would write it off too. But when you get deeper into it and you learn more about it and you start unpacking it more, then I feel like that's where it's like something to stand on, and that's where you can glean the most insight and how all of the functions work together. Because, you know, the truth is, if people saying like, oh, I'm an ambivert, well, it's like, yeah, that's our goal. With the cognitive functions, we have both introversion and extroversion, and we use them in different ways. And so with that, as we get older, we would want to become more balanced and more of an ambivert and not just leaning too much on one side. And so I think people get a misconception of what introversion versus extroversion means pertaining to the Myers-Briggs and cognitive functions. And then also same with like judging versus perceiving. Like we all have parts of us that are introverted and parts of us that are extrovert. We all have parts of us that think and parts of us that feel. We have parts of us that are judging and perceiving, that are organized, disorganized, and all of that combined. We are not this one-dimensional being. We are a multi-dimensional person, and also within that, there's also so much more dimensions. We're all very unique individual beings. One personality, like ISFJ, is not going to be the same to another ISFJ. There's just going to be lots of overlap, but things that they're interested in, their background, how they're raised, the passions they have, the cultural ties are going to be different, and that's going to influence. So that's kind of like a lot of nuance to that. So what are the cognitive functions? And why do I even care about personality tests? Like, let's just get to that. So I think it's really important because you may be a child of someone who is very different than you, and that can cause friction, those differences. And if you don't have the tools to understand, like, this is where they're coming from, this is how they perceive and judge the world, perceiving and judging, And this is how they think and feel. This is how they sense and intuit. I don't know if intuit's a word. And this is where they extrovert and this is where they introvert. That is all really important when you're having interpersonal dynamics or working dynamics or friendships or whatever it is. Those relationships, it's good to know. That's what I'll say. It's nice to know. Do you need it? Of course not. Like, I went a good, couple years without being, super obsessed, trying to figure out everyone's type in my life and what that means and everything like that. But it is good to know. For example, we'll talk about dating apps sometime in the future. Again, God is just, not having me do it yet because I'm still on them and lining up things. But anywho, so this person on this dating app had a personality type. I asked him because I'm into it, and so I'm just curious, and he told me, and it's the exact opposite of my personality type. And I'm not going to discount someone because of that. I think that's where people can get wrong is being oh, you're this type, so I'm not going to be friends with you. I'm not going to potentially pursue a relationship or whatnot or work with you. But I think it is good to know, and it was very interesting to see how things played out and how he approached things and how I approached things and how we communicated, even just in a very brief amount of time. And it, in a sense, proved to me why I wouldn't necessarily be inclined to date someone of this type or why they wouldn't be inclined to date someone like me. And that doesn't mean that you can't. But it just kind of showed me these are the reasons why someone like me would probably not date someone like that. And I've had that in the past as well of another type that I had a thing with where it was I can see why we did not work out, and not just based off of the type alone. That's putting a lot of bank on that. I think that's as a Christian, that's why I think a lot of Christians either really love the Enneagram, for example, or they really, really hate it, is because, well, one, they really hate it because it's well, no, I'm an individual, unique being, I'm a child of God, I want to know what God says about me, I don't want to know what this personality test says about me, and you're putting a lot of identity in this, and hope and foundation and filtering people through this. I don't want any part of that. I'm going straight to the Bible, to God, that's where I'm getting my source of identity and truth. And who God says I am and all that stuff like that. And then there's some people who are really into it. They're but I want to be able to serve people better. I want to understand myself better. I want self-awareness. I want to know my strong points and my weaknesses. I want to know my pitfalls and things that I'm really good at, underdeveloped strengths, things like that. So it's that self-awareness to want to grow. And I think people are that's where the pushback comes in. It's okay, but yeah, you want to grow in this things, but what about growing in Christ? So I definitely, I see both sides, because I obviously was in this, and then I also was in this camp. I was in both camps, so I see both sides, but I try to kind of find a balanced middle ground. And then personally, how I see Enneagram, it was by really sketchy people who did automatic writing and didn't really have any foundation or anything, and to me it just doesn't logically make sense. The numbers and the wings and all of that stuff, the way they explain it, none of it really makes sense to me. But to me, the letters and the cognitive functions and the stacks, that all makes a lot more logical sense to me. And I know they did a brain scan, and I feel it's been around for longer and more psychologists have jumped on it and expanded on it and made it deeper. So I think that gives me more credibility. And another way that I've seen people explain, or how I've explained the Myers-Briggs versus Enneagram, is Myers-Briggs is the car, and then the Enneagram is how you drive the car. So Myers-Briggs is more on your brain and how it functions and how it processes information, and Enneagram is a little bit more how you act it out and live your life. So that's where I see the differences, because, for example, theoretically, if both personality tests were valid, then everyone who is an ENFP would get a type 7, because they would both be valid. But I see some ENFPs get a type 7 or a type 9 or a type 3 maybe, with the Enneagram. And so that's what I mean by like, that's why I see this one is more, it's like the brain, it's the car. And then that one is like how you drive the car and how you like act out and like relate to people and like live your life. So that kind of aspect to it. And I also don't really love how in the church that there was like pastors doing sermons about the Enneagram, or like having you read it as like a part of like a small group and things like that. To me, that's just like pretty blasphemous because like this is church, this is a Bible study, like we're supposed to be focused on the Lord. Like if you want to in your own time do that for fun, for your own self-awareness and for your own interpersonal relationships, fine. But I think when people put too much of an emphasis, like Enneagram I'll use especially because I don't really hear the church talking about Myers-Briggs that much, but I've heard so many stories of people talking about the Enneagram. And I have a friend who like kind of in a sense got fired because of her Enneagram. And it was kind of like, oh, well, you're such a 4, so like that's why you're failing at these like administrative tasks or these like small detail things. And they kind of like, it's like you're putting them to a fault and you're like discounting them because of their personality type just right away. Or like, oh, people can also use it as an excuse of like, oh, I'm such a 2, so that's why I'm such a people pleaser. It's just like who I am. And it's kind of like an excuse. It's like, no, that's like a fear of man. That's a sin. Like, don't just be like, this is just who I am, so like gotta deal with them. I'm a 2, I'm a 2-wing 3, like this is just how I am. This is how, like, you know what I'm saying? I just think people put too much emphasis, and when they make people in their church take it and then they filter everything through that, it's like, oh, that's such a 4 thing to say. Or it's just a 7 in me being super like, you know, and it's like, don't. It's like an excuse for your sin. Like it's dismissing. It's not even calling it sin. At that point, it's like, it's who I am, you know? And it's like, no, but like, who does God say you are? And who is God calling you to be? So, got that all out of the way. Now we're going to talk about my personality type. So if you haven't, I mean, I've been talking for 17 minutes now about this. I could talk about personality types. So if you want me to make a whole nother video, I'll probably do that in the future maybe, because I don't want this to be like 45 minutes because I haven't even talked about my type yet. So I'll say my type, but if you want me to expand on my experience and then people in my life that I've interacted with or seen other interactions with and things, like I got tons of stories. But I'm an Infp. Not really surprising. I definitely relate to other types. Sometimes like an INTP or an ISFP, you know, it's that one letter off that I'm like, I kind of relate to that, or like an ENFP. So you can relate to the one letters off, which is why people usually, or like an INFJ, can get lost in it. But I guess briefly, so like I can relate to an INFJ. But I had like a roommate in college who was an INFJ, and sure, we had similarities, but we had a lot of differences. Like on the outside surface, just looking at us, you'd be like, oh wow, like they're the same, you know? But if you actually like sat down with us or spent a day with us or listened into our conversations, you would hear that we are like very, very, very different. Very different. Our whole cognitive function stack is like complete opposites. So it's very interesting to learn about the cognitive function stack because it really makes the whole mistyping thing, it's a lot easier to sift through, and it's a lot easier to pinpoint a lot quicker. So there, for example, mine is FINE SITE. So T is the bottom. And what's interesting about cognitive functions, so I've learned about them in the past, but I didn't really pay attention to them at large and how they, like how you got to the cognitive function. It was like, cognitive functions. But recently I've been watching videos explaining like how you can decode the INFP part, and I'm not going to try to explain that here, but you can decode it from the letters. And then also there is the mirroring and the polarity to it. So like I have FI and then I have TE. You see like the opposite of it, feeling, thinking, introverted, extroverted, and they're flipped on the cognitive function stack. So FI is number 1, and then that means T is number 4. And then I have NE, and then I have SI. and again, they're flipped. So that's really interesting to me, and to see how I like live my life and filter things through this has been very fascinating to me, especially recently, and just where I use my different cognitive functions. And I think it's nice to have words to explain things to people. Like, for example, a lot of people think I am an extrovert because I have extrovertedness to me. But what's cool about now knowing the cognitive functions a little bit more deeply than I did a few years ago is I can explain to someone now, like my mom, where I get my extroversion from and where I get my introversion from, and how they coexist together, and how they need to have a symbiotic relationship, or else I'm going to be too unhealthy in either direction. So, for example, the FI is values, it's principles, it's my internal feelings and moral code. That's a very big part of me, like especially with my video on mask mandates. That's a very FI, like these are my principles, these are my values. I hold them very tightly, and they matter a lot to me. So that's like the FI. And then the NE, the extroverted intuition, is trying new things. It's being very exploring. It is making connections between things out in the external world, lots of ideas, going to concerts, traveling, meeting new people in coffee shops. That's a lot of NE. And then the SI part of me is a lot of traditions and nostalgia and the past, and like how that plays a part in my life is creativity and editing things and writing stories and stuff like that. And then TE is the like get it done in me. Like if you ever see me in an organization, like I love leading like Bible studies, or in college I was a part of like a small groups communications class, and I just naturally took charge. So I can be I'm naturally a follower, but the TE in me, like if no one else is willing to step up and lead, or I see them doing something wrong or not with my values, or like I have those any ideas and I want them implemented, like the TE in me will be like pushed up forward and I will like take charge. And that's where like the project part of me comes in, and the T is really important because the FI is like the feelings, part, and the SI, if I'm in an FI-SI loop, then that is when I'm most creative. That's when I am editing past travel videos or past photos, writing about my past life experiences, song lyrics, stuff like that. It's very FI-SI. But if I'm just in my feelings and I don't have those TE part to implement it, that's when it can be really bad, because I'm in this, I have no outlet. That's where I'm like binging Netflix. Like if I'm in an FI-SI loop, I'm depressed pretty much. I'm binging Netflix. I'm not having the TE have all of those feelings put out into the world and created, which is like necessary. And that's why INFPs are so artistic. They're writing novels, they are writing songs, they are creating paintings and art and all this stuff. It's beautiful, but you need that TE, and you also need that NE, because like you need experiences to then get in an FI-SI state, basically to fuel it. So like I go out and I travel and I take pictures and videos. That's the NE, exploring and seeing the world and all these wonderful like creativity and experiences. But then I need that FI-SI part of me, like I need that to then fuel the FI-SI. So the FI-SI is still, like FI is still number one, and the SI helps the FI, like with the nostalgia, and the NE comes in, like they're all very symbiotic. I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining it, but it's all very symbiotic and they all play into each other. And like I said, the NE experiences fuels the FI-SI to have like an outlet, and then the T is like, let's create, function, like project, business type thing. So it's all very interesting, but TE is definitely the lowest. Like I am not a good execution person. The NE part of me, the ideas, like visionary. FI, NE, like feelings, values, internal stuff, creativity, all of that. And then the NE is like ideas, change, exploring, all this wonderful creativity, they come together, and that is a beautiful visionary passion project. I'm just like tons of ideas on like movies and businesses and like church functions, like literally anything. Those two together, it's a powerhouse. But because my TE is my most low function, not as developed, it's really hard for me to implement that stuff. And then if I do implement it, I don't have SE, and this is where we can get into like the shadow functions, which I haven't fully explored yet. Like I know about it, but I haven't fully like delved into it. But the shadow functions is really fascinating. To where it's like I do have those shadow functions underneath, but like how do they play a part? Interesting to like look into more. Maybe I'll make that in my next video of like going into it deeper and answering like any questions you have or more insights. But like the SE is a lot of the external sensing, so that's when you care about like appearance and setup in your body and like activeness and stuff like that. I don't really have a ton of that, hence why I do videos like this. I don't set up the background exists, it's outside, and I change it up every single time, so it's not just like the boring same old. And then I don't edit my videos because I guess that's like the T in me being like, meh. But it's just, I'm not going to. Like I know that if I'm outputting into the world my Enneagram, SI, but I know the T is so like low that I'm not gonna sit down and edit the video and comb through it and like have all these cool editing techniques and pictures, and it's like a PowerPoint, and it's a wonderful, amazing video that totally encapsulates you. Me sitting down in front of the camera and just talking is very FI of me. It's like, let's sit down and talk about our feelings and thoughts and like the ideas and intuitions I have, and I'm externalizing it by making this video. And then like the SI part of me is talking about my past and like adventures and stories. So this is all like this, how I set up my YouTube channel is very INFP of me, in my opinion. And it's very interesting, but like learning about it. So there's Alexis Kingsley, she's an INTJ and she makes videos, and I really like the way that she talks. She's very like to the point, but she's also kind of bland, but she knows that about herself, and she's gotten better of like presentation, a lot better than me at least. But I think my INFP like personality hopefully keeps you engaged. So what's interesting about her videos is that she's very growth oriented, and so it's been helpful. Even though she's an INTJ and she makes most of those videos, she also just makes general growth videos and then general Myers-Briggs videos. It's been interesting to watch her and like learn a lot from her and learn more about how I can implement the cognitive functions, how they work together symbiotically, which ones I should focus on, which ones I should kind of discount, and all of that stuff. So that's been really good. I also watch Kristen, like Dear Kristen, and then Frank James. Frank James I heard about like years ago. He's been doing it for a while now, the skits. And then like I said, it kind of like fell off the wagon with that. LOL, it sounds like so negative, like alcohol, but fell off the bandwagon with it. And then I came into it, and then that's how I heard about Alexis Kingsley and Dear Kristen. Dear Kristen does similar things to Frank James, where she will make skits, but she does them in her own unique way. And so I really like that. It's been really great for me to get back into it. There's not a lot of channels. Like I've tried to click on other channels about INFPs. Maybe INFPs, I think INFPs are like me. So like when an INFP makes a video about being an INFP, it's very painful to watch, because it's probably similar to me of like, I'm not really caring about like the SE of it and like all the editing techniques. I'm just like sitting down in front of the camera like FI. So that's really interesting. I don't like watching their videos, or I like watching the INTJ video. I share cognitive functions with an INTJ. She has the FITE, except hers are second and third and mine are first and fourth. And then she has NI is number 1 for her, and SE is number 4. So that's really interesting to see how like she has different ones of that, but then similar ones, but they're in a different order, and how that plays out. I tried to watch an ENTJ do a video on INFP once, and ENTJs are just so harsh. They're just so harsh. Wow, this is 29 minutes. I seriously think that this might have to be turned into 2 parts, honestly, because this is gonna be a long video. I don't think I've ever done that, but unless I just post like a 45-minute long video that would be longer than my breakup videos, which is just like, wow. But clearly I'm very passionate about this, and I'm literally just touching the surface. I'll talk briefly about my parents before I end it, because I do want to end it in the 30s and not get into the 40s. Oh my goodness, I don't think I've ever had to do this before, but I reached 29 minutes and that was the maximum recording time, so it literally just stopped recording. So I'm gonna have to put this in Premiere Pro and at least combine the two clips, which will be a pain in my butt. But anywho, so let's wrap this up as soon as possible. My parents. So from what I can understand, I'm pretty sure, like 99% sure, that my dad is an ISFJ and my mom is an ISTJ. And when I had them first take the inaccurate 16 personalities test, they both got ISFJ. What? But because my parents are very similar, but they're also very different. So then once I did more research, I was like, no, my mom's definitely an ISTJ and my dad's definitely an ISFJ. So that's been interesting to see how they view the world. Very different. I personally don't love sensors. We have a hard time getting along or just connecting, I would say. It's not even like getting along like we're fighting, but it's connecting that has been very hard for me as an intuitive type. And I think it goes down to like how we see the world. So that to me is like the number one thing in someone that I am to be with. Like I would much rather be around an ENTJ where they have the E and they have the T and they have the J and like they have all these different cognitive functions and the order and everything. Like I would much rather be with an ENTJ than like an ESTJ or like an ISFJ or any other type, you know, like N is the most important to me out of anything. And so it's really hard that my mom and dad both have S's, which is great for them but hard for me. We're very different how we perceive the world. There's like animal noises, like a cat or something. So that's why it was really helpful in high school to learn about it and to be like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense now. And I think it also helps you appreciate the people more and where they're coming from and how they live life and just accepting that it's different. And I think it's also interesting to see how like friendships form. So like I have a friend who I've known for a while now, and she has a personality type that I wouldn't normally be friends with, but because we became friends like a long time ago, we've stayed friends. And I think if we met today, I don't think we would be friends. But it's like, it's that FI, or not even FI, but it's like that SI part of me that's like nostalgia, tradition, the past that like holds on to that friendship. And I think it's in a similar way for her. I don't know if she has SI. I can't remember, and I know I can decode it if I wanted to. But what I know of that type, they also care about like the past and nostalgia to their own degree. So maybe they also have SI, and that's why we're friends still. So it's interesting to see those things play into your relational dynamics. And yeah, so it's just interesting. And it's also see like how I as an INFP relate to different types and how I perceive them and how they perceive me and just how our interactions go. Like I have a friend who is an ENTP, and he is just like very fun to be around, but also like very interesting and like someone I would not ever want to date because of like the way that he interacts with the world and views the world, but it's like fun to be around. So that's where there's like a difference. Like there's some types that are fun to be around, and there's some types that you're just like, kindred spirit, you know, like we have like a bond, and like that's why we're like such good friends. We can hang out all the time or just have fun together in like our own unique way. And then there's some types that it's just like, I just never interact with you. Like, I know you exist out there. I know I've probably come into contact with you, but just because we're just not naturally inclined to, like, connect and want to be friends, it's very unlikely for us to, unless we're like put in certain circumstances to where there's like some external reason why we're bonded together. You know, I think of that like with family types. I don't know if I would, like, I think that's why it's hard as I've grown up. It's like, I don't know if I would be friends with my parents, you know? And there's certain people that like I've met throughout the years that I'm thinking of where it's like, had these external circumstances happened to bond us, I don't know if we would be friends. And then there's some people that I'm meeting now, and it's all very fascinating to me. It's so fascinating. I love it so much. But like I've learned not to put so much bank on it, because I think sometimes what I can get into is like wanting to figure people out and figure out how we work together and figure out like why they do these things and why I do that, and like getting a little bit too much like, oh, this is like the INFP in me. It's like, no, I'm Stacy. You know, that's why I get why people like hate personality tests, because like the more that I grow, the more I feel like it can be very limiting. And it can be very constraining and very stereotype-y. You know, like I'm watching some of these skits and it's like, I relate to the INTP in this, you know, and then I think that's why I don't really like the whole like skits aspect of it, because then it can make people question, you know, like, oh, am I actually an INFP? Or like maybe I'm an INTP, or like I relate to an ENFJ in this. Like, what does that say? And I think that's where it's like, as we get older, we just become more well-rounded and balanced. We have more experiences, more dynamics with different people, and it just makes us more well-rounded. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, I'll always lean back on the INFP things, and that's what I find interesting. It's like, what is your go-to? It's like we can utilize all these different cognitive functions in different settings, but what am I falling back to? What is my like neutral state? And that is what's interesting to me, because like I said, I sometimes go heavily in a TE where I can get into like my ESTJ-ness if I wanted to. But that's not my natural state. That's not where I feel most calm, peaceful, and thriving, and, you know, that's just like not where I normally would want to be. That would be expending a lot of energy for me, and that would drain me. Like if I am in an environment where I have to be too TE-NE, that is very draining for me, and that's where I get burnt out and very exhausted. And then same if I am in a current state where I'm very FI-SI, that's where I get very depressed. Like if I am too introverted, I get very depressed. I need those extroverted moments and those adventures with friends to fuel me, to then go and have my alone time, because I need my alone time. I need breaks to seclude myself and to have a moment of breathing. So it's interesting. I dare you to go look into this more. Do not take the 16 personalities quiz. Google cognitive functions, read descriptions, read about the stacks, look at all the different ones and how they function together, and have fun with it. And it's really fun. The more that I get better learning about this, the easier it is for me to type people, even without having them have to take a test. Some people are a little bit harder to type than others, depending on like how healthy they are, how stereotypical they are of a certain type, or more well-rounded. But it is really interesting. I will link down Alexis Kingsley's channel so you can go watch some of her videos, because I do really love them. She hasn't made a lot of Myers-Briggs videos recently, which is really sad, but I hope she does soon, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I was very happy and excited to make it, and I'm going to end this video before it hits 40 minutes. Okay, bye. Have a great day. I'll see you next week.